welcome back to episode 2 of our ground driving series. We're standing here with Gracie, one of our Wolf Hollow young horses, and she's ready to move on to the next stage of her training, so that's why we're using her for this video. So today I'm going to discuss how we go about that very first ground driving session. So I can pretty much guarantee for the majority of horses it's going to be very messy looking, and don't worry about that at the very beginning. If you are unfamiliar with ground driving, I would recommend that you find a horse that already is pretty well versed in ground driving or just steering off the bridle in general. So that way you can kind of practice, make sure you are aware of where your hands are, where your lines are, where your horse is, and just get a feel for ground driving before you kind of start ground driving a young horse, because it's all new to them. So if it's also new to you, it's probably going to get very confusing and frustrating for both yourself and the horse. So, how I usually go about ground driving is you need a pair of lines. My preference is that they're about 20-25 feet. That gives you a nice distance away from the horse and allows you to do things like ground driving through obstacles and other maneuvers without being right in kind of that kick range when you're first ground driving your horse. So these ones are part of our Dreamscape tack line. So they're just 25-foot rope line. And so I usually, by this stage, your horse should be pretty well desensitized to things like ropes. So basically, I just end up tossing them out behind the horse, and I take whichever end attaches to the bridle. It goes through the stirrup, and then I just clip it or tie it to the bit, whichever attachments you happen to have. If you haven't done any dragging groundwork with your horse, kind of the first thing I do is I kind of lead them around a little bit, just get them used to those lines dragging behind them on either side, because some horses get really nervous and claustrophobic with that pressure behind their hip with the lines dragging. Other horses don't care at all. So it's always a nice little step that I do just to make sure everybody can stay safe. I always make sure one of those times while we're doing this, I pull her towards me here so that that line comes across her hind end to make sure that she's not going to have any issue with that. If she steps over the lines like that, I'm not too worried about it. That was good. Bring her around the other direction. Make sure she's okay with the other rope going behind her hind end. Perfect. Just going to bring her up here a little bit so we can straighten up so I'll be able to pick up my lines. Take off the lead rope. Now, the most important thing for the ground driving, especially if you're new to it or you're ground driving a young horse, one of the most important things, for me personally, I like wearing gloves just to make sure if they go and pull or they spook sideways, you're not going to get any rope burn. And then I also want to be very cognizant of where the ends of my lines are. So there's many ways you could do this. You could just coil them up like you would your lunge line, and you could carry them this way with the bulk in your hand, as long as you're able to lengthen and shorten your lines as you go. Most of the time I just leave them long. It's good desensitizing for the horses anyway. You just have to be very aware that you don't get tangled up in them as you go. So, because of the way we're standing, just because this is where she stood nice and quiet, I'm actually going to step behind her, and I'm actually going to use my left line to do that follow the feel around exercise that we talked about in our previous video, and I'm going to start getting her to walk a circle to the left. So it's really helpful when they already know how to lunge. I'm just going to bring that line up behind her, and I'm just going to generate a little bit of energy to get her walking. Voice cues if that's what your horse is trained to do. If she wants to go to the right, I'm going to start going to the right instead. So you can see I'm using my right hand no different than we would with the sending exercise with the lunging, just to get her out on that circle to start with. So basically, I'm just kind of lunging her a little bit with the two driving lines. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on that right line to tip her nose so she can get used to the feel of that bit in her mouth with the line. I'm always aware of where these tails are at my feet. So every now and then I just move them out of the way to make sure that as we're going in a circle here, they're not going to get wrapped around my feet. And I'm just going to let her walk wherever she wants to walk at the moment, no different than if we were doing a first ride. To let her figure out these lines. So where she lost momentum there, I was just a little tight on my line, so I just generate that forward movement again, give her a little bit of slack. So I'm adding a little bit of pressure with my right line, keep her coming along on this circle, using that pressure behind her, that energy created with that line behind her to ask her to step up. Oh. If she wants to trot, I'm not going to be too worried about that as long as she's doing it in a relaxed fashion. I'm just going to hold some pressure there on the lines to get her to come back down. And she actually did that beautifully. Nice stop. She did gape her mouth a little bit, but this is only the fourth time she's worn the bridle. So I'm just holding both. It's all part of the learning process for them. There we go. Let go. So even though she was really heavy on my hand there, this is the very first backup step I've ever asked her off the bridle. So even though she only gave me that kind of little half step, and she was really heavy on my hand, you still have to release that because they did still back up. And then as we build up her ground driving, she's going to be able to do that nice and soft. I'm going to generate a little bit of energy here with my left line, see if we can go to the left now. And I get it. So you always want to make sure you're kind of positioned, even if you're on a circle, that you're kind of positioned more kind of between their hip and the back cinch. I always kind of like being able to see their flank. It puts you behind that drive line to where you can still send them forward. You can still put pressure on your lines. And you can still send over there. This side, even though the exercises in our previous video were stiffer to this side, she's actually softer. Yeah, so that's all right there. If they start turning, just keep that pressure there until they move out and just reposition yourself as you have to. So right there, she's just trying to figure out bridle, so I'm just going to give her that moment there. If she pulls on my hand, I'm just going to apply gentle pressure on that left line. Don't be surprised if they play with the bit a little bit like she's doing and moving her tongue around. She's kind of chomping on it a bit. That'll all soften up as we go through this process. Alright, so now that she kind of has an idea of a little bit of a left and a right, we're going to start kind of serpentining around some of our obstacles here. I'm not going to be too worried about making her go over the bridges. We're basically just using them as a marker to practice our steering. So you kind of want to still be positioned towards that flank, and you're just going to kind of walk around with them. Always be cognizant where your lines are, so that nothing gets tangled up. I'm not really going to be too worried about where she goes, if she goes one direction or the other at the moment. Because again, this is the very first time she's ever ground drove. So right there, she's kind of pulling away, so I'm just going to keep her going to the left, create a little bit of energy with that line. And when she softens and straightens up, we're just going to let that go. Back down to a walk, steady pressure on both lines, easy, there we go. It's a beautiful trot, but I just want to focus on some walking right now. So I'm going to come through here, I'm going to add a little, go with my left line, a little bit more pressure with my right line, see if I can get her to come around this skinny bridge, beautiful. And don't worry if you're this kind of distance away from your horse, that's why we use the nice long lines. Because it's basically getting her to steer on her own without me having to be right there with her. So that way when we get on, we have some power steering. So right there, I'm just going to generate a little bit of energy with that left line. Get her walking forward. Again, just going to steady pressure both lines, bring her back to a walk. Tighten up that left line. Get her to steer back towards the camera here. Generate a little bit of energy with that outside line if I have to. Hold that. There we go. she was about to cut into that circle. So I just want to hold that outside line to make sure she stays straight. Play with the bit a little bit there. Hold the left line, give it back. Generate some pressure. Hold that right line. She wants to go over the bridge, so I'm not going to not let her. So as we come back through the center between all these obstacles, I'm going to hold that right line there just to make sure she doesn't cut in. I'm going to hold both lines, and whoa. Whoa. Hold that there until she actually comes to a stop, give it back. Hold it again if I have to. There. Just going to hold that again, see if I can get a little step of back up. There, let go. Going to pick up again, see if I can get one more step. Oh, there, let go. That was much softer. And because that was so soft, I'm going to ask for one more. There, beautiful. And we're just going to wait here for a second. And we'll let her have that rest moment as a nice reward for being soft. And then when I start up again, I'm going to get her going back to the right. And then we're just going to keep serpentining around. So for that very first session, that is all I worry about. We just walk around. If all we manage to do is little circles, because maybe they're spooking at the lines, or maybe they're just very unsure about going in a straight line with you behind them or towards their flank, I basically just keep them on that circle, and we just kind of work on what I would call like double lunging. You're just lunging with the ground driving lines, basically. But because she's a really nice mare, a really nice filly, she was able to do the whole serpentine exercise on that first try ground driving, but not all horses get to that point. So just be cognizant of your horse and what they seem to be able to kind of work through their brain in that particular session. And I don't worry about trotting, we don't worry about loping, we don't worry about any fancy maneuvers. I basically just want a nice little walk, serpentine around the arena, and a stop and a backup. And I don't even necessarily want us doing, sliding stops or super intense backups. I basically just want what you just saw. I just want one little step, nice and soft. There we go. Now she's starting to get it. Because now I just have the lines in the crook of my thumb there. So I'm not actually holding the lines. They're just kind of sitting in my thumb. And basically all I'm doing there is just closing my fingers around the line and tipping my pinky down a little bit. So it puts just a little bit of pressure there, and that's what she's responding to. And that's exactly where I want her. And as we advance that, hold her there just for a second. As we advance that, back up, Grace. Use the voice cue if you have to. Just hold that pressure there. There we go. So as you refine all the ground driving, you'll be able to add a trot. You'll have a nice soft stop and a backup. And you'll be able to start adding maneuvers like a turn on the haunches and rollbacks. And I do all that with the ground driving lines before I ever get on them. And it makes them much, much easier to ride when you first get on.